Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Today we have 3 brand new stories for you, starting with a petty revenge story. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. No overtime, but we want you to come in when we're short. In high school, I worked at a pizza place for 2 years. I started out bussing tables and washing dishes. Later, I delivered pizzas and waited. After that, I learned how to make the dough, grease the pans, etc. I worked 12 to 15 hours per week during the school year and as much as I could in the summer. I worked on short notice when someone didn't show up. I wasn't the best employee, but I knew how to show up. My last summer there, I was usually scheduled for 32 hours, but they would call me in a lot. One payday, I got my check and a lecture from the owner because I worked 56 hours in 1 week. He explained they did not want to pay overtime, so I needed to keep track and inform the manager if I was over 40 hours. Well, that sucks. The next week, I was scheduled for 12 hours. I talked to the manager who told me not to worry because I'd be the first one they'd call if they needed someone to cover a shift. Why don't you just schedule me 40 hours and call someone else in? Because we know you'll come in if we need you. I only worked about 20 hours that week. I was complaining about it to a friend who hooked me up with a job at another restaurant. They agreed to work around my pizza schedule. Despite a dozen calls, I never worked another unscheduled shift at the pizza place. The manager asked me why I quit coming in, and I told him I found another job. I probably hurt myself more than I hurt them, but it felt good to tell them I was busy when they called. And our second story. Force me to obtain my own work uniform with no notice after slashing my hours? Really? My final retail job was at a preppy designer clothing store. When I started working there, we were encouraged to wear the brand to work, although you could also wear plain khakis and a plain polo shirt. Then, after a while, the manager left. The new GM, a vicious, racist, labor law ignoring psychopath, announces that we all have to switch uniforms. Khakis or denim only, and a navy blue polo shirt or button-down only. Which would be fine, but the company won't provide them. And the GM from hell waited until 3 days before the deadline to tell us, and at the time the store was very picked over from a big sale, so there was almost no acceptable stock, and all the most common sizes in those styles were gone. About 60 employees, mostly part-timers, were frantically scrambling to find acceptable clothes with almost no notice at our own expense, and nearly all of us had to look elsewhere. This was a particularly nightmarish prospect for me. I'd had my hours slashed repeatedly in retaliation for reporting a work injury. The GM was later demoted over it, and another manager was fired. That's another story. I had no money. After rent and food, I had nothing left at the end of the month, and for the first time ever in my life, had to carry a balance on my credit card just to eat. And I can live on almost nothing. And by this point, that balance was maxed out due to car repairs. To make matters worse, my body is a nightmare to fit. Polos hang on me like tents, and button-ups are always gap. Even if I could afford to buy the clothes I was now expected to wear, they weren't going to fit me to brand standards, and I would not have time to take them apart and reconstruct them. I went to the managers and explained that I couldn't afford any more clothes. They cut my hours. The GM had deliberately interfered with my job search, like I was going to stay put with her around. My credit card was maxed out, and I had no money left. Could I please get some help? Oh, it can be any brand, just no logo. Maybe you didn't hear me. I can't even afford to go to Goodwill. True. They blew me off, again. So you won't help me? Suit yourselves. I called my mom and asked if she had any of the navy blue cotton fabric left over from a long time ago sewing project. I was a fashion design major in art school. I know how to make a shirt that fits me. I already had one pair of handmade jeans since R&R discontinued my preferred cut. The shirt met the required criteria of having a collar and buttons, but I deliberately did not do a great job, and I know how to do a great job. I didn't have time to make a collar mock-up and just adjust the pattern for the best drape. Oh well, the collar's just going to sit funny. I only had enough interfacing for the placket and undercollar. Oh well, the collar already sits kind of funny anyway. I didn't have time to turn the collar points out exactly right. Oh well, they just won't quite match, and one of them's going to stick out a bit. I didn't have time to fix some crooked top stitching. Oh well, the thread matches anyway. I didn't have time to sew functional buttonholes. Oh well, the shirt closes with hidden zippers anyway, so it wouldn't gap. I didn't have time or money to go to the fabric store for matching buttons and use several different similar ones. Oh well, you'd have to have a very sharp eye to notice. The fabric rolled and creased a bit along the hemline in, 3 or 4 places. Oh well, I didn't have time to press it, let alone hand-stitch it. The first day the uniform rule was in effect, evil GM got one look at the shirt and her nasty smug smirk evaporated. She was fuming, but she couldn't do or say anything about it. After all, it fit the required criteria, and it was the best anyone could reasonably be expected to do with no notice, no money, and no help whatsoever. Sewing is a lot of work, you know. Yes, I got the hell out of there as soon as I could. And our last story. Blame me for your mistake? Lose your job. First, some background. The principal of my school, we'll call him Matt, had been with the school since it started up in the early 2000s. He worked his way up from a regular teacher to principal and then assistant superintendent. Although he spent most of his time at the high school, his immediate supervisor, we'll call Katie, was pretty much a figurehead while he did all the administrative stuff for not just the high school but the rest of the district. The thing was that Matt was a narcissist. He constantly belittled and berated students. He once publicly told an entire graduating class that he would make sure that none of them graduated and they were all the worst the school had ever had. There were also numerous and other instances of him doing this stuff to students in private, especially with the kids who did the school announcements, which he also ran. I had 2 friends on there. One was dismissed, student volunteer, out of nowhere for literally no reason. The other was fired. She chose to work for the school after graduating, after calling him out for saying she was worthless. Despite this, all of our teachers assured us that Matt wasn't as bad as we thought he was. We never believed them because we thought they were just covering for him. After we graduated, we discovered that he was indeed not as bad as we thought. He was worse. Matt frequently told the teachers that they were worthless, dumb, that he could not fire them, and that anyone could do their jobs. From what we saw over the years, it didn't take a lot for him to fire anyone. Now at this point, you may wonder why Katie didn't step in and at least try to tell him to knock his crap off. Well, again, he did all the admin stuff. They were also friends from back in the day, so while she heard numerous complaints about him, she never acted on them. Now on to the revenge. Like everywhere else, the state mandates that we take their standardized test. The state was always very clear about when the deadlines for the tests were, what portions were to be taken by each grade, and what the penalties were for not making the deadlines. A few weeks prior to the deadline, the school gets issued all parts of the test except for the science portion. Matt says he'll talk to the Department of Education and get it squared away. After a couple of weeks, they still don't have the portion they need, and Katie asks where it is. Matt informs everyone that the state said they didn't have to take it. Some of you might be wondering why the state would say they didn't need to take it after making such a big deal about it. The answer is simple. They didn't. Matt, in his infinite narcissistic wisdom, decided not to get them. Because of this, the state opened an investigation and held meetings about revoking the charter for the entire district, essentially shutting them down. But Matt didn't get in trouble. Since Katie was superintendent, it was her job to make sure those tests were ordered. The story ended up going public, and Katie took full responsibility for the screw-up. Matt also berated her in private like he did with everyone else. She later steps down from her position as superintendent, but maintained her positions on the school board and the corporate board. Remember this for later. Matt takes over as superintendent of the entire district. Matt could have stopped there, but being a narcissist and a dictator, he doesn't. He publishes a scathing open letter on the school's website blaming her for the whole ordeal and the fallout. He then has the principals of the other schools do the same. As far as the media, the public, and the Department of Education are concerned, the whole affair was due entirely to Katie's utter incompetence. Matt also continues berating her in private. After 2 months, the state decides they aren't going to shut down the district, much to everyone's relief. Some months later, they go back to not giving 2 craps about what a small charter district does. Now that there are no eyes on them, Katie starts making moves. She wanted to get control of the district back from Matt, and now that she knew that all the claims that students, parents, and employees made over the years were true. As I mentioned earlier, she did maintain her position on the school board, and they could theoretically remove him. The problem was that the other 2 people on there were put on there by Matt, so she'd always be on the minority on any vote. But also, as I mentioned earlier, she had a position on the corporate board, a body whose decisions and authority superseded that of the school board. She goes about gradually restaffing the corporate board. When Matt asked her why, she says it's to make sure that a similar mistake would never occur again. Matt believes her and thinks nothing of it. After about a month, she added 7 people, including her husband, onto the corporate board. They hold their first meeting and then call in Matt to inform him of their first order of business. He was being given the option to resign, and if he didn't resign, he'd be fired. Matt, not really having a choice, resigns. The next day, the high school's principal, a friend of his, also resigned. The day after that, the athletics director for the high school, Matt's son, followed suit. Katie then takes over in the interim and begins looking around for people to fill all the positions that Matt had consolidated. I think that there were 7 or 8 total. The teachers and faculty all breathed a sigh of relief knowing that they didn't need to be afraid of being fired at the drop of a hat anymore. As for the students, they hardly noticed. My old English teacher put it as not even a ripple. Outside of those differences, the only thing anyone noticed after Matt and his cronies left was that a lot of really nice furniture went missing. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.